Okay, I think I'll just get started with my introduction. My name is Lisa Goulet. I am the Engagement Coordinator for UArctic Canadian members here at Memorial University's Harris Centre, and I'm the host for today's webinar. The University of the Arctic, for those who don't know, is a network of universities, colleges, and research institutes and other organizations concerned with education and research in and about the North. We have people from all over Canada and the Arctic in this webinar today, so that's very exciting. I'm going to start with today's land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. So thank you for joining us today for our presentation on youth leadership in the North. We have about 20 minutes for the panel discussion, followed by 15 minutes where you will have the opportunity to put some of your questions forward to the speakers. To keep things simple, we made sure to enable the Q&A function. So if you could put your questions throughout the webinar into the Q&A function, that would be fantastic. Feel free to post your questions throughout the session, as well as during the Q&A part of the webinar. Lastly, I'd like to remind you that this session is being recorded, so all of those who have registered will receive a link and a follow-up email after this webinar is done. So it's with my great pleasure to officially introduce our moderator, Patty Bruns. Patty Bruns has been the Secretary General of the Arctic Mayors Forum since 2022, bringing extensive experience in Arctic governance from her roles with the Arctic Council and Global Affairs Canada. Arctic Mayors Forum prioritizes youth in its strategic plan and collaborates with UArctic, the Arctic Initiative at Harvard, the Center for the World Reindeer Husbandry, and other partners to empower youth leadership in Arctic communities. Patty is dedicated to fostering dialogue and action that supports resilient, sustainable Arctic communities in the face of change. So Patty, if you'd like to take over and introduce some of our panelists and start the discussion.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here today with our distinguished speakers and also so many of you joining online. I see there are people joining not only from the Arctic, but all over the world, which is really exciting. So today's format will be a Q&A session. We'll do that for about 20 minutes or so. And then we really would like to have an interactive discussion with all of you online. So please already start thinking about questions as we get the conversation going. So with me today as panelists, first we have Taya Tutu. Taya is the Executive Director of the Arctic Children and Youth Foundation based in Iqaluit, Nunavut in Canada, providing equitable access to basic needs and the health and social and educational well-being of Inuit children in Qikiqtaaluk, sorry if I said that wrong, Taya, region of Nunavut, with a lineage of Métis and Inuk. She was raised with cultural values from both backgrounds. Advocate and avid dog lover, Taya loves to hike, hunt, boat, camp, berry pick, and enjoy time with her family and friends. So thank you so much, Taya, for joining us today. Next, we have Viljo Vuoromaki. Viljo is a 23-year-old political science student at the University of Lapland. He is the chairperson of the Council of the Student Union of the University of Lapland and a member of the Arctic Youth Committee under the Norwegian chairship of the Arctic Council. He's also a student representative on the UArctic board. His work focuses on promoting international collaboration and student engagement within the Arctic region. Viljo is actively involved in student politics and has gained experience in international matters through his role on the board of the Student Union, where he has served as chair of the board. And also joining us today is Laura Bass. Laura is joining us, I believe, from St. John's, Newfoundland today. And she is a dedicated environmental educator with a passion for fostering stewardship through experiential learning. With several years of experience in the field, she specializes in creating hands-on programs that connect people to nature and empower them to take personal climate action. Laura currently runs the Climate Collective based out of St. John's, Newfoundland, and the aim of the project is to help youth develop climate actions in their communities and to help youth in Newfoundland and Labrador with youth in other northern communities and the Arctic. We're hoping to hear a little bit more about your work today, Laura. So, welcome, all of you. I just wanted to start off with a question that I like to ask young people who are in leadership roles, why this topic is important to you and what inspired you to take on a leadership role in your community or in your field of expertise. So, Taya, can I open up the discussion with you by answering that question?
Sure. And so again, just to reiterate the question, why is this topic important and what pushed me to move into a leadership position? I have to go way back with this question, which is when I was a child in Nunavut. Nunavut became Nunavut in 1999, right as I was starting my education school system. And throughout my entire childhood, we heard, youth are the future. You're the future. And so there was almost like an inherent push and drive from my childhood that told me if I'm not working to make a difference in my future, then, or it basically told me I had to, like you will be the future. And so I think that has always driven me to want to do good in my community. I am blessed to have a father who was in politics from 1999 to 2016, and then a mother who had disability with me when I was young. So in terms of seeing the different demographics of my family from here and my family from elsewhere in Canada, what really drives me is seeing the way my mom helped people even while she was in pain and knowing that um, you can make a big impact even on a small scale. And so that's why I'm here in my position is because I am the first generation in the workforce coming out of Nunavut specifically, not the Northwest Territories. And I have been blessed to have different opportunities in my life that have helped me to get here. And I want to make sure that more youth in Nunavut specifically see that they are also capable and that they can get here. That's really important to me.
That's great, Taya. Thank you for that. And we're gonna pick up on some of those opportunities and also some of the challenges further in our discussion. Viljo, let's go over to you over in Rovaniemi, Finland. And why is this topic important to you? And what sort of inspired you to step into a leadership role at such a early in your career?
I think it's the old age saying as well that the youth are the future. I think it's significantly important to kind of elaborate on the fact that youth are the future in a sense that we will be making those decisions regarding any kind of global aspects. And to have kind of knowledgeable actors, it's critically important that knowledge is transferred as early on as possible towards those young actors so that they eventually, when they get to a position, they are as prepared as possible to make the right decisions to kind of make the Arctic move forward. Personally, myself, my career is kind of being based on wanting to make a change, of course, as a lot of young actors have this ambitious ambition when they're young. But my sole purpose was not to take on specific leadership positions. I think it was more of a going what felt right in a sense, and really trying to gain experience, well, through leadership roles, but very much to learn how things work, because I think that's a fundamental factor is trying to understand how things work. So I really wanted to do my share in making a change, and that really is based on me wanting to also kind of build a better, in a sense, foundation for the next generations as well. I think it's also always critically important to remind youth leaders that it doesn't stop at their experience. It's just as important for us being the youth that we are now to do the same work for the next generation, in a sense. But really, my career has very much been kind of a domino effect. I haven't had a specific objective to build towards two. I've kind of been doing my stuff in some sense, and then kind of transferred that into new projects, and that kind of builds this momentum in working on things. Then.
I think that's a great point about sort of capitalizing on the opportunities that you're sort of being presented with. And also I really like the what you bring up about sort of this intergenerational knowledge. So maybe we'll get in a little bit later in our discussion about the role that that elders and olders play in sort of sharing that knowledge. Laura, over to you. I guess you have a lot of experience working on the land. So tell us why this topic is important to you and what encouraged you to step into a leadership role.
Yeah, so I did spend a few years in conservation work, directly in field work and in the forestry sector, and doing some remediation projects and seeing climate impacts firsthand. So I would say it had a pretty significant impact on my mental health. And after seeing that and feeling, some of the typical feelings around climate change, feeling helpless, feeling a lot of anxiety, a lot of discomfort around what's happening and what we're doing to help mitigate some of those impacts, I moved on to more of an educator role in the environmental education realm. And I wanted to work directly with people who felt like me and felt like they wanted to do something but didn't know where to start. So working on helping tackle a really difficult impacts, difficult situations, and just noticing how powerful education can be as a tool to help foster feelings of stewardship and help to educate people on the state of things. So I guess in a way to kind of to help support feelings of stewardship and an urgency for action. So that's kind of my pathway.
Excellent. Thanks for that. So when you have been sort of on your trajectory of moving, into leadership roles, I'm just wondering, what kind of challenges have you faced in terms of, have you experienced a barrier or some sort of challenge? You mentioned that, Laura, I'll just stay with you for this first response, but you mentioned that, your work when you were younger sort of challenged your mental health and really inspired you to sort of take on more of a role and be more active. So aside from that, maybe there are some other challenges that you've had, and can you share a couple of those with us?
Sure. Yeah. I think there's a gap in knowledge of understanding the problem and then knowing how and where to act. So I think that there is a lot of work to be done with connecting the pieces. So for youth to be able to identify an issue, maybe something they're passionate about, and then being able to find the tools and have the energy and keep the momentum of following through. So I think a lot of initiatives require a lot of volunteer hours, a lot of extracurricular engagement, which can be really challenging, especially when it's really emotionally driven work. And I'll talk about this a little bit later too, about how passionate I am about these initiatives being, having more opportunities for green careers and green initiatives where youth are paid a fair living wage to be able to help to carry through some of this work.
Yeah, those are really excellent points. And I think one of the things, Tay, I'm going to turn to you on this now about sort of the tools and the energy to sort of keep moving forward, especially on topics that are really challenging in a lot of cases. So I'm wondering, Taya, how it has been for you, sort of being in your community and taking on a role helping the youngest people in your community, and what kind of challenges you have come up against, and maybe even offer us some solutions or some things that have helped you through overcoming those barriers.
Yeah, so while I was listening to Laura, I was taking note and reflecting on some of the similar challenges. And I was also noting down some of the core things I can think of right off the bat, which are things like poor infrastructure, lack of funding to build infrastructure, which means lack of housing. One of the challenges of being a leader is everyone needs housing that comes to work for you, and trying to find housing in a market where there is no housing has a huge toll on mental health. This week I was successful in housing 2 of my staff, and it just felt like such a great feat to be able to find housing for my employees. I also put mental health and trauma down. And the reason I put this is because in an Indigenous community, in an Inuit community, everyone here has trauma, and we really, really want to promote Inuit working in the workspace, but have to acknowledge that every Inuk working here has a level of trauma as well. So our staff sometimes need the same kindness and willingness to understand and accept and empathy of where they're at. Sometimes they can't come to work, and we have to understand that that's the reality of where we work. Is people have other things in their life that they have to deal with: mental health, traumatic experiences, violence, addictions, and still trying to make a living to support their family through what they might be experiencing at home. I think one of the biggest challenges, they kind of go hand in hand, are being Native and being young. I am a young Inuk woman, and first of all, just being young means people take me less seriously in this space, or do not expect me to come up and make the approach on topics that I do. And then being Native, one challenge I have seen both between being young and being Native is a immediate change in trust. So we had issues within our internal staffing that because I was young and because I was Native, I was not seen as having the Western background to be qualified for this position. And some staff had an issue with that. And on the other sense, our stakeholders, when I was bringing up an issue or a concern to a stakeholder, the response was, "Oh, did I hurt your feelings?" And like, again, putting me down into in a lower space to make me less than of, and making it personal versus professional, which is what the topic was at hand. So I have a lot of, my challenges are fighting people's perceptions of what they expect of me because of my age and who I am, versus actually what I am capable of and what I do and how I work. And the ways to overcome that is just really like, some of the things I've done is just accept that being a Native person, being a vocal advocate for Inuit and Inuit rights, Indigenous rights across Canada, Indigenous people across the world, means that I will make people uncomfortable. And coming to terms with people being in uncomfortable settings, it is really something that you have to grow thick skin for. I have to know that people aren't going to like me, and not everyone's going to like what I have to say, but I am speaking up for the right reasons and for the people that bring those reasons up for me. And so part of it is being the face that people can pick on, well, so that other people get supported without it. And I think it is really accepting that you can only do so much to change someone's perception of you. How you present yourself and how you decide to move forward is really what's important, and has helped me get through some of these challenges.
Thanks for that, Taya. There are some really important takeaways in that I would like to touch base on, and I hope we'll be able to do so also in our discussion with the folks online. So, Julio, does any of those things ring true to you in terms of especially legitimacy and being young and presenting yourself in a way that's taken seriously?
Oh, most definitely. I face kind of different challenges, of course, being kind of a white male in Finland. I think when it comes to challenges in any kind of leadership positions, changes based on the country, the regions, and the organizations. So it's very complex and difficult trying to generalize what are specific challenges facing youth when it's just kind of a spectrum of different things and different layers. It's awfully difficult to try to kind of address all of them at the same time. For myself, when it comes to very specific significant challenges, I have a few. Most notably is really collaboration on a not only on a regional sense in Finland, but also on an international setting. It's immensely time consuming and work consuming to try to connect with active youth members across the Arctic, because each individual that is very active in Arctic communities is very, very ambitious and already consumed by their work regionally. And if you try to address a kind of a pan-Arctic issue or challenge to face with different organizations in different areas of the Arctic, it requires more time and more time from that person that they're already using in their day. We only have 24 hours, and during those 24 hours, we're supposed to sleep, eat, and use our free time. So there's a limited amount of resources that can be used. And really, it's difficult engaging with specific individuals that could really bring us all together. But this mental health kind of discussion is very important. In the student unions in Finland, it's something that gets brought up almost every year when the new board is chosen, and it's also kind of a political discussion that is always had. This mental health crisis of youth. A lot of people are expected to kind of balance their free time, their studies, and then their work, because they of course have to pay bills in some senses, and of course then, in addition to all of that, try to bring this ambitious work in building something much larger than themselves. Impossible. This will inevitably affect your own mental health and how you put too much pressure on yourself. But the pressure is not only kind of inside of yourself, it is also an outside pressure, and that's just a recipe for disaster. And once youth are brought into this kind of brink of a burnout, you kind of go over the edge where you're not able to do anything afterwards. So that's an even worse outcome of this overworking individuals. But we always have the same discussions on mental health, and the same expectations, and the expectation actually grow higher each year. The same individuals are expected to do more, to take on even more tasks, because they think that they are able to handle such work. And it's a difficult saying no when you want to make a change, of course. I think when it comes to kind of potential solutions, empathy plays a big role in understanding that not everybody has time or the resources necessary to kind of plan everything. But it's also about having this, I would say, genuine interest in youth, and through that building a equal collaboration sense that the youth are expected to do some part of that work, but then policymakers or decision makers also have an understanding on what it takes for youth to make those decisions and do that work as well.
I think this is a perfect segue into, thank you for that. And I just have to say that in some of the workshops that we've done in the project that we're working on with University of the Arctic and Harvard and the World Reindeer Herders, we've had this discussion about really what empowering young people in communities to take on these roles means. And at the center of it is sort of these two things about that it's not one thing, it's all encompassing. It takes on many different aspects in people's lives, and there's a resilience there that I think needs to be recognized, but also that we the olders need to listen to what young people are saying, so that we can really make sure that there is knowledge sharing happening in an effective way. So let me ask you this. What can current leaders and decision makers in the Arctic do to help facilitate um, some of the solutions that you've mentioned, and help to mitigate the mental health burdens, and also expectations, and make sure that we're not burning out these, bright young leaders that we are just so keen to work with, especially in a time when there is a lot of focus on young people in the Arctic. So, Laura, I'm going to let you jump back in here. What can we do to help?
Sure, yeah. I think that sometimes there's like a sort of symbolic involvement of youth. It seems to be like a trending topic, as you mentioned. It's an emerging theme of issues in the Arctic, and I think it's really important to kind of move away from that and actually give youth a space at the table with policymakers, and allow that knowledge to be used where it's going to be most valuable. so not just offering support in that way, but also empowering youth. There's only so much work to be done when you're banging your head against the wall and kind of, as Viola was saying, working a couple of jobs, going to school, and then doing this kind of stuff on the side of your desk. So taking that passion and that knowledge and actually utilizing it in a way that's going to be really useful and beneficial in policy. I think also, as I mentioned earlier, just like investing in youth. So finding sources of funding, offering scholarships, educational opportunities, skill development, and then job creation. There's a lot of emphasis on unpaid work or internships for youth. Like you have to get your experience after you get your undergrad and then your master's, and then you go do an internship. And meanwhile, the bills are piling up, and an entry-level job only pays so much. So I think it really turns people away from doing this type of work in a way, or they're living outside their means, and it makes it that much more difficult to sustain. So I think having really meaningful job placements that pay a living wage is it's absolutely critical to be sustainable.
Absolutely. And I think that this is something that we've been hearing for a long time, but this idea that we can't expect young people to contribute their time, energy, resources, and brilliance to projects without properly funding them. And I know Taya and I have had this discussion before, but it is about also funding the organizations that are doing work in the Arctic at a level where we can sustain the engagement of young people the way that I think a lot of organizations across the Arctic would like to do so. Taya, I know you've been doing some traveling recently and talking about this topic, and I'm just wondering if you were at the Arctic Youth Conference in Tromsø recently, and what you took away from that experience, and whether or not you felt well supported in that space. What could be done better? What can we take away from those kinds of opportunities to make those places and spaces better when you do have a place at the table?
Actually, it's funny because I actually felt really connected at the Arctic Youth Conference versus Arctic Net, which came just like a day after or so. The difference in representation was significant. At the Arctic Youth Conference, it was amazing. I think kind of like Laura was saying, it brought together youth from across the circumpolar Arctic, and they were all like-minded and all had these ambitions and goals and hopes and dreams for their community. So I really enjoyed the Arctic Youth Conference for the day that I was able to attend, because it's always so empowering to see other youth feeling empowered enough and safe enough to use their voice to make change. And that is something that always really excites me, is to hear like-minded people who have a different approach, bring up a whole new concept that we can learn and grow together with. I found that the conference in itself was quite nice. I think for me, the biggest thing when it came to ArcticNet was representation matters. Also something I learned in the Emerging Leaders of Arctic Frontiers cohort is, and I have to preface it with, it doesn't take away from anyone's value. It doesn't, but including Indigenous people from across their areas in decision making doesn't take away from locals. It doesn't take away from other community members who are from out of the country, but it's giving people a voice that they never had before. And so representation is really important, not because we're trying to take away from other voices, but actually because our voice as Indigenous people add to the fact that I'm a woman, an Indigenous woman, our voice has never been taken seriously, simply based on the Indigenous lens. Our knowledge wasn't taken as literal. Our history wasn't literal. And it's really important for people like me to see other people like me on these stages, because when I was there, as interesting as the conversations were, I didn't hear anything that was really relevant to where I'm from. And I think people really struggle to understand the complex differences that Nunavut in Canada has compared to just the rest of Canada. And so that was also just quite evident, is that in that space, there were not many people like me. And I felt underrepresented and felt like the voices being heard to represent my nation were voices that were coming from a place of privilege and didn't have the same perspective that people really, I think, need to hear what people who live in Nunavut at least have to say about what they're dealing with and their struggles. And it's a whole different landscape than anything that was really talked about. And it really just comes back to basics. I know everyone's talking about it a lot right now, but meeting people's basic needs, doesn't matter the community, doesn't matter how much it costs to get stuff there, meeting their basic needs gives people the opportunity to actually take the next step, like Viljo, you were saying, of having that at your desk and being like, I'm exhausted. I don't want to do that. I'm just going to push it aside. When you give people access to housing, food security, a bed, and they have a good place, a safe place to sleep every night and wake up and go to work the next morning, you will have way more success than if you do not have those basic needs met. And what we see where I'm from is a lot of our basic needs are not being met, which is my work does to address some of those areas. But really, it's not that the people aren't capable. It's that their needs aren't met and they don't have the privilege to be able to think of the extras in life that go beyond, like they're struggling to put food on the table and they're worried about how to feed their kids. They're not worrying about what's going on in the States and Canada right now, you know? And so that knowledge right there with representation in that to give that perspective of, yes, we need to think about the real world issues of the Arctic with Russia, China, United States, Greenland, Arctic waters, the Northwest Passage, but we also need to think back to basics to the very base level. If we don't do that, we can talk all we want about different things we can do, but ensuring that our people all people have basic needs met is one of the easiest ways. And I say easy because it seems simple, but really meeting people's basic needs isn't easy when it comes down to where the money comes from and what you need to get there. But if all of our organizations across the circumpolar globe started working to ensure that their policies met their staff's basic needs, you would see higher input in the workforce. You would see more productivity. And I just think that there's so many opportunities in the North that we don't even get to think about here where I live because we don't have our basic needs met.
And I think, Taya, it's really, thank you for mentioning, bringing it back to this representation and also about something that that Viljo mentioned, which was about trust. And I think that there is a lot of knowledge that, we're talking about a pan-Arctic perspective, right? So it's easy to miss the nuances of how different parts of the Arctic actually are. And so making sure that when we're organizing things, we have that representation and taking responsibility as organizers to say that it is actually going to we're going to have to do some work together to make sure that we're representing all the different parts of the Arctic and doing so in a respectful and inclusive way. So, Julia, when you were on the chairship youth council or committee organizing the conference, and is this something that you guys talked about when organizing the conference? It's had some really excellent outcomes, and the feedback has been that as Taya said, it was wonderful to be with so many young people and to have that focus. So, have you had a chance to reflect on what we might do better next time, or how did you sort of want to address some of these things going in?
Yeah, so I think the whole initiative by the Norwegian chairship was amazing. It facilitated this absolutely astonishing success of getting youth across the Arctic to meet and network and discuss and while trying to understand their point of view. I think it was it was great. I think it was an awesome, for myself included, to be able to work throughout the 8 months with different individuals from different organizations. I felt incredibly privileged of kind of figuring out how we're going to make it work and how we're going to make this a success. There's a lot of things that were brought up in the Arctic Youth Conference. A lot of the plenary session really discussed different matters of the Arctic. So there was not only one message that we wanted to get across, it was trying to really kickstart kind of this not only social event in a sense, because this was the first time such event was able to make was able to make it work, but kind of build, based from that conference, some larger pan-Arctic collaboration. The idea is that this stays the start of something brand new. It's the pillars for a new foundation, or the pillars for a new collaboration. And one of the workshops we had at the end of the conference was especially successful in addressing these issues. We had some Arctic parliamentarians attending the conference or the workshop, and that was a direct discussion with those Arctic decision makers in figuring out what can we do, what can they do to enable youth collaboration, and what we can do to kind of move forward and enable more teamwork in the Arctic. It still stayed very much too much of a social event, but what can you expect from the first event of its kind? The idea is that the next one that will be organized, hopefully by the next yearship, will take note from our mistakes in quotation and our comments, and then build an even greater foundation, an even greater conference of some sort. Hopefully, we'll see that in a few years. Some of the major takeaways still that we were in agreement with was the need for critical structures and foundations for youth leadership, but also youth actors in the Arctic. Any kind of organization in the Arctic, no matter Finland or Norway or Sweden and Canada, where we have this problem is that we have individual youth activists, but what we would need to have is to have youth incorporated in the decision making and kind of see that as a self-evident matter and not as a specific task handled by this specific individual that happens to be very active in the Arctic community. That requires kind of a change in mindset, I suppose, and an attitude from the higher ups or political decision makers or decision makers in specific organizations, and really understanding and seeing that the youth are able to bring something beneficial for those organizations on that decision making table. And that will inevitably change the processes to have more youth inclusiveness as well as youth oriented decisions. And that kind of connects with that flow of knowledge thematic or discussion. And when the youth are as actively involved in those processes, no matter what, that flow of information is already way smoother than having to kind of dump everything down on specific individuals and giving them the responsibility. Okay, you'll handle this, you'll transfer the information to the next youth. No, that doesn't work. It has to be a specific process, a flow of information, and that kind of enables to also not categorize youth in one specific block, but to kind of that we should not have this barrier between what is considered youth and what is considered a political decision maker, that the youth are already involved, so we don't have to specifically say how do we include youth, because the idea is that they're already part of the process, so there is no involvement because they're part of that idea in itself.
Yeah, I think that is definitely the trend, and I think it's responding to a lot of the messages that I think decision makers are hearing, is that it's not about having, the youth conference was great. I'm sure we'll have another one or other opportunities, but those should be opportunities to talk more deeply about specific issues that then are actually discussed at decision-making tables. So I think that's a really, nice sort of a good way for all of us to think about it. We have 15 to 17 minutes left. I'm going to encourage everybody online to please send in some more questions. We do have a couple. So I'm going to just go through them and encourage our panelists just to jump in and we can just have a bit of a discussion. So unsurprisingly, there is a question about the future of the geopolitical shift in the Arctic and the role that youth play. There's also within that question a request to shower some light on the green conundrum. And sorry, I just got taken away on the screen. And then video, if you could also answer a little bit about how this particular Rehan Tahir could become more involved in youth leadership in Finland. So maybe we'll start with you, Laura. What would be your opinion regarding the current geopolitics in the Arctic and how we can, keep a focus on the things that are really important in the Arctic, considering that we're in a different security environment at the moment?
It's a great question. I might need some more time to kind of formulate a good response on that one. I do think that there are certain issues that are going to distract from participation and of having youth involved in these hemispheres, I guess. But yeah, maybe come back to me on this one if you don't mind. I need some time to kind of mull that one over.
Sure. Could you say something a little bit about sort of the green conundrum? You sort of work in this climate climate empowerment space for young people. So how is the sort of green conundrum being addressed by your organization or in Canada or in some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, can you clarify the term? I actually haven't heard of it before.
So I think it's maybe Renan, if you want to put something back in the chat just as a follow-up for exactly clarifying that. But sort of this the double-edged sword of sort of greening, what does that mean for people in communities actually, I think is sort of what he's trying to get at. And how do we make sure that we're actually respecting the rights holders and making sure that we're moving in the right direction and not going to be taking advantage of people, situations, and I think it's also connected to geopolitics.
Yeah, I think especially in the work that I do, being place-based is very important. It's a critical part of the programming that we offer. So when we work with different communities, it's of the utmost importance to acknowledge what it is that their community is looking for. So recognizing strengths and areas for growth and, taking into account that every community has different priorities and different unique needs that need to be addressed. So yes. So in terms of the green conundrum, I suppose you could say there isn't one size fits all for every community. Every community is going to have unique characteristics and unique perspectives that will need to be taken into account for any type of work going forward.
Great, thanks for that. Viljo, you live in the Nordic countries, and certainly green has been a really important policy topic for the EU and also in the Arctic, considering that this is where a lot of the natural resources are and critical minerals in particular. Is this something that you're addressing with some of the boards and conversations that you're having with other young people? What is the view from sort of your seat in northern Finland?
There's some discussion. I think it's always difficult as a student representative when it comes to the UArctic board. There's only so many matters that I can take into consideration and really bring up to the table. I think it's important to do my share in choosing specific areas of expertise and then bringing those up in those discussions so that it doesn't stay too diverse and then the message doesn't get across as necessarily as I would like to. But when it comes to the green transitions, for example, I think something which has the Nordic countries have failed in a sense is the inclusion of indigenous peoples in the political decision making, and it changes quite drastically between the three Nordic countries. And I don't feel comfortable enough to comment because those get really specific when it comes to abiding the law and how it works. But there still needs to be a lot of work, including indigenous peoples, indigenous youth in those decisions, because those are decisions that are directly affecting their way of living and those areas that they live in, including in Finland as well. So I definitely think that when it comes to discussions in projects that are involved with the word green, I believe most people really want to see innovative projects being funded. And I think that's important because I think youth represents, in a lot of ways, innovativeness. And what I think us as youth kind of differentiate from other researchers or political decision makers, we're able to think outside the box. So we don't have this linear way of thinking too often. So then we're also are able to come up with potential, but at times drastic changes that could potentially work, but need the funding and the trust from those funders themselves. And that is immensely difficult in figuring out on stabilizing or finding that balance of it being realistic enough that it would get that funding, but also innovative enough to make an actual deep, insightful change in the Arctic.
I'm going to go back to Laura because Laura, I think this is something that at the Climate Collective that you're actually trying to help in a lot of ways. So maybe tell us a little bit about what you're doing at the Climate Collective to sort of inspire this innovativeness at among young people. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. So part of our programming is targeted at providing seed funding to communities who want to apply for it. So we offer climate action planning workshops. So with the idea that climate action can be personal, like every small impact can make a big change. So it's usually community-based or school-based, and we offer the support of running the workshop. So what is climate change? What does it look like in your community? What are the impacts that face you directly? And what are some ways that you could, what are some issues that could improve in your community? And then that kind of helps get the juices flowing, and then the youth are able to choose a project that they are able to lead. So with the support of an administrator or a community leader, and then they pitch a project and then they use the funding to carry that out. So we have lots of great examples of some that are underway and some that have been completed. And it's very inspiring. It's very empowering for youth to be able to go through the process of identifying these issues in their own backyard, and then being able to do something and feel the empowerment of being able to facilitate that and see it through and feel like they've made a difference.
That's really inspiring. I hope that our guests online will check it out, and I know I'm going to be following up with you as well because I'm really interested from an Arctic Mayors Forum perspective of how we can learn from partners like the Climate Collective on how we can take your lessons learned and actually make them work in other communities and maybe even do some connections between Canadian and international youth. We're going to move to our second question, and Taya, this one was directed towards you, but I want Julio and Laura, you can also jump in as we move deeper into the discussion. But this person asked, what advice or recommendations do you have for young women facing opposition, such as sexism and misogyny in the workplace, when advocating for or challenging ethical concerns in colonial organizations which don't align with Indigenous ways of knowing and reconciliation in Canada? So do you have some good advice for this person? You're on mute too.
That is a big question, and thank you for asking. One thing, just for some context, when I was a kid, I was quite shy. I was very quiet and introverted. I was more an observer. I didn't know. I was also not a kid that had a future dream of wanting to be a doctor or a veterinarian or a teacher. I always just knew that I would do something, whatever I get posed to do, and I would do it well because that's the determination within me. So my advice would be to one, believe in yourself. Because if you're feeling uncomfortable, there's a reason for it. And people can gaslight you so many ways, especially in the workforce, to make you think that you're not thinking straight, or because you're young, what you're saying is just emotional or personal. And I've had two experiences with manipulative, narcissistic, misogynistic men in my life, and in the last 5 years of my growth into leadership. And so one is I had someone who was supposed to be my partner who did not believe in me or did not like the power they saw in me to use my voice. And so what they did for many years was actually to tear me down and to bring my confidence down. So when I say believe in yourself, I really mean it, because there was a period where I stopped believing in myself and other people were seeing I was capable, and I was still promoted and moved into a leadership position, because even though I was being dragged down, I was still working hard the way I knew and I believed in myself that the work shows. So when you stick to your guns, regardless of what people say about you, you just keep, I'm not saying keep your nose down. I'm saying just make sure you follow the right processes, that you're doing things correctly so they can't come back on you for anything. Keep notes, track things that people say. The other experience I had directly in work is when I was moving into a leadership position, my organization actually created a mentee position, and I was a mentee under the previous executive director for 1 year. And throughout that year, there was a director in one of our programs that every time I would go into the office, he would question me in front of all of our staff, like, what's your job again? What's your responsibility? And really making the whole team question me. And I had a really internal feeling of there's something further in that messaging that he was trying to get to but I never had proof, I never had evidence. And in the end, I had to fire this employee for other reasons. But what came out of it was a much less toxic workspace of like everyone is comfortable coming to work now. And what it really showed me was if when it comes to men in the workspace or women who treat you poorly or less than, it is not actually a reflection of what you actually are. It's a reflection of how they feel and their fear of what you could do in their place. It means you hold power. And so rather than being torn down and feeling unsupported by that person, again, stick to your guns, because that person did not believe in me. And their last words were, good luck going on with your organization without me. And we've double backed and improved our services in the last 5 months. So I stuck to my guns. Something inside my stomach knew that that I knew that I had to either change his position or let him go. And in the process of changing his position, his insecurity showed so significantly that led to him being let go. And so if people are tearing you down in any manner, it means that you have power and they're scared of what you would do if you had the proper support. So keep going, work hard, and don't, I mean, I was about to say a movie quote, but don't let the haters get you down.
Well, thank you for that, Tay. I think those are really coming from a place of empowerment, and your messages are always so strong, and there is so much to take away from this conversation. I see that Lisa was going to take over for concluding comments, but I understand that her Zoom has crashed. So I'm just going to wrap things up a little bit by asking you all sort of for one last comment. It's coming as a question from Sheila Downer, who is with the University of the Arctic and a partner with us on a lot of the youth work that AMF does. So thank you, Sheila. But she wants to know sort of how can we do better? So how can the University of the Arctic, Arctic Mayors Forum, and other organizations that are truly invested in hearing young people do better? So if you could give us a takeaway in 2 sentences, what would it be? So Vilja, I'm going to start with you.
That's an incredibly difficult to kind of put into 2 sentences. I think the way I can answer it is just the fact that it's being open and understanding of the potential of youth. I think that's critically important. It's about giving the opportunities, the networking scenarios, and different tools for youth to grow as individuals and leaders. And I think something I would have said previously in different meetings is the fact that my own position that I've been on the board and the things I've been able to do throughout my years are based on the fact that they are existing structures that were built upon by the older generations believing in youth activeness in those organizations. So just myself being here is based on the fact that some older gentleman, woman, or the higher ups believed that there was potential in adding a student representative in the UArctic board, and that enabled me to be where I am today because of that confidence in youth work.
Thanks for that. Over to you, Laura.
Yeah, I think just to continue to provide these opportunities and to be open, just to kind of echo what Viho was saying. And also offering recognition for youth that do put all that effort out there. I think having that recognition reciprocates a lot of gratitude and a lot more value that goes into the work. So I think it reinforces that this work is really hard, but at the end of the day, when it's recognized, it can be that little boost to keep going. So I think that inspires, I think that can inspire more good work to be done. So I think just being open, providing opportunities, recognition, and creating a space for it.
Thanks. And Taya, any last words, any last thoughts?
My advice or takeaways are really to listen. Listen to the youth, listen to the people in the community that you're planning on doing work in. It's not like, hey, we want to do this, it would be good for you, but actually, hey, would you like to do this? It could be good for you, but maybe they have a better idea. So I think my biggest takeaway is to listen to the communities that you're working in, listen to the people from them. And to also take up space. We're youth, and sometimes it's hard or it feels uncomfortable to take up space. But one conversation I had at Arctic Frontiers towards the end of the conference was exactly that, the power in being disruptive. And for me, that's the power in being disruptive to a Western colonial system that doesn't work for my people. And there's a lot of power in that. And that goes for women, that goes for youth, that goes for all people who identify differently from the standard normal of society. And so I just want to say, take up space, and be comfortable with what you're speaking about, and know what you're talking about, and do the research.
Well, I would like to thank all of you for taking up space with me today. It's been such a lovely conversation. An hour goes way too quickly. And of course, the questions start kind of rolling in right as we finish. So I would just like to say that I know a few of you have had some chats in the chat to either follow up with Taya, Laura, or Vilja. So please do reach out. Thank you, Taya. Thank you, Vilja. Thank you, Laura, for sharing your time and experience with us today. Thank you to all of our attendees for your great questions. If you've enjoyed today's event, please do check out the University of the Arctic events and discussions. This was part of a 4-part webinar series, so there will be more coming. This session was also recorded, so there will be a link in your inbox if you want to email it out to anybody that you think might have been interested in any of the things that we discussed. So with that, thank you again to all of you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day, evening, or morning. So signing off from all of us. Thank you so much.